a pleasant good night to my IBYC audience. My name is Pastor Robert Williams. I'm the youth pastor at Grace Baptist Church in the island, on the island of Antigua and Barbuda, and it's a pleasure. I've been helping out with IBYC for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years now, and it's a great opportunity to be able to bring you the challenge for tonight, as we focus on our theme of steering through the storms and the storms of life. And tonight, we're dealing with what happens during the storm. And it was June 14th, it was Monday, June 14th, when a few of us from the IBYC team were meeting on Zoom, just going over some of the details for the conference. And as we're going over these details and talking about storms of life and how we could best bring out that topic, little did I know that in a few hours, I would end up in my own storm. See, the day before, all right, my third child was born. All right, her name is Hadassah, all right, and that's Esther's Hebrew name, or that's the name that God gave Esther. And Hadassah, lovely little girl, I love her to death. And she was born, great. Doctor said everything's looking good, and I was a happy man. I was a happy father because I really wanted a girl. My oldest is a girl, and then I have a son, Jonathan, and the oldest is Abigail, and now I have my third child is a girl, Hadassah. But that night, Monday, that night, going into the morning, as I just happened to be awake and looking at her, and as she was lying there, all of a sudden she began to gasp, or it looked like she was trying to throw up. And then she began to twist and turn, and all of a sudden, all these weird noises began to come out of her mouth. She began to, every breath in and every breath out was a noise. It was a wheeze, it was a grunt, it was a crackle. And all these, I was starting to wonder what's going on. And even her chest, you could see she's trying to suck the air in and shooting it out and trying desperately to breathe. Now, she wasn't choking, she could breathe, but every breath was a struggle. I immediately called the midwife because she gave us a list of things that if these things happen, if any of these things happen, call me, we have a problem. And some of the stuff was happening. So I called her, I said, listen, this stuff is happening, what do I do? She says, listen, I don't like what I'm hearing, call 911. Call the ambulance, I'm on my way. So immediately, I'm holding her here, and she's doing all this weird stuff and making all these weird noises. My wife goes downstairs to make the call, and as she leaves the room, it's like, all hell breaks loose. And she begins to cry and wheeze and snort and just struggle. And I'm holding her in my arms. I'm holding her in my arms, and all of a sudden a voice comes to me, and not audible or, outside voice. It sounds like my own thoughts. At least what I think are my own thoughts, telling me your daughter's about to die in your hands. Funny thing is, these same hands, right? These same hands, I was given the opportunity to catch her when she came out. Right? Some of you might be like, oh, but no, trust me, it's amazing. Right? I was given that opportunity at the last minute, said, hey, you want to do this? I was like, sure. All right, let's do this. All right, so the same hands that you caught her with are the same hands that she's going to die in. All right, and then this cloud of fear just came over me. All right, now to give you a little more backstory, I've been interning at the hospital, working in the social services unit, and one of the things we have to do a lot is counseling. And we have to counsel a lot of mothers who had miscarriages, mothers whose children are born with disabilities, mothers whose children are born disfigured. Any situation that happens, primarily a lot happens with a lot of pregnant moms because everybody comes through there. And I've had to sit down there and counsel through them. Even had to counsel an old friend of mine who lost a child. And as you're doing this in the back of your mind, it's like your wife's pregnant and you're about to have a child. What if something happens? And all these doubts and fears are piling up. And as I was standing there, they all came crashing down. It's like, ha, there it is. All right, we call the ambulance, and we get her to the hospital. As soon as we get her to the hospital, she begins to calm down. And as she calms down, the doctor says, listen, I did all my tests, and she looks fine. X-ray's fine, everything's fine, and he has this kind of look on his face like, are you guys exaggerating? Are you one of these parents who are just, overly cautious? A couple hours later, it happened again. And it happened with them there. All right? the machine, the one that goes beep, 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 all right? The machine began, with all her vitals, began to go off. All right? Her blood oxygen levels began to go down. You can see her stomach, she sucked her diaphragm in, trying to get that air out and shoot it out. And she was struggling to breathe. And the doctor came in and they put her in oxygen. And the doctor went back out. He made a phone call because they didn't have a newborn specialist at that hospital. The newborn specialist unit was 2 hours away at another hospital. All right? So just to give some context, I'm not in Antigua at this time. Well, I'm here now talking to you. But when she was born in the States. Just in case you're thinking, 2 hours? Antigua's not so big. You can't go anywhere in 2 hours. All right? Well, Antigua's big to me. All right? But no, we were in the States when this happened. All right? But the next, the NIC unit is 2 hours away. And when he comes back in from speaking to them, he has this dread look on his face. He's like, listen, I spoke to them. They don't like what they're hearing. We need to get her prepped. I need to get her over there right now. And in a few minutes, about 4 nurses and doctors came in the room and they began to work on her, poke her, plug her, do all that sort of stuff they had to do, get an IV in, put the monitor things in, stuff like that. And she's crying, screaming out in pain because she didn't know what's happening. She's getting poked and prodded. She's getting blood drawn. And we're sitting there because what's going on? And they don't know what's going on. They don't know what the problem is. And I'm standing there and all this fear is on top of me, and I was standing there in a storm. Just like these men, Matthew chapter 8. The Bible tells us, verse 23, and when he entered into a ship, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with much waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he said unto them, why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? And he arose, he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. But the men marveled, saying, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him? As these men were sitting in this boat, mind you, 4 of them were fishermen. All right? Now when fishermen are on the water and they're panicking, you need to panic. Listen, if there's a fire in the house over there and you see people standing there taking, videotaping, whatever people do nowadays, and the spectators are watching the firemen out the fire, and all of a sudden you see the firemen drop the hose, drop their equipment, and start running, what are you going to do? You better run. Why? Because if these are the firemen and they're running from a fire, well then, man, who am I? And the same thing, if these are the fishermen, and they should be used to storms, and they're losing their minds, and they're panicking, they're saying, Lord, we perish. All these men were frightened. The Bible tells us, Jesus told them, why were ye so fearful? Why are you afraid? Fear came over these men. We're about to lose our lives, right? The word here that's used here literally means hurricane. They were experiencing hurricane force winds on the water. Not only that, but in Mark, the terminology used is the terms that are used for earthquakes. He was using earthquake terms to describe a storm on the ocean. What does that mean? Because it was such magnitude. It was shaking them up. The water's coming in. The winds are blowing. They literally thought, we perish. We're going to die. They were filled with fear. And maybe as you're listening right now, you're going through your own storm. And yes, you have the big pandemic, but maybe it's a personal storm. Listen, you could be sitting at the table with your family and friends and everybody's happy and smiling, having a good time. But as you're sitting there in your own personal storm. You're sitting there with a situation in your life that you don't know how to handle and it's shaking you up. This can very well happen. And it will happen. The saying is either you're in a storm, either you're about to go into a storm, or either you're coming out of a storm. The reality is storms of life come to us and we need to know how we can navigate through them. And tonight we're talking about what to do during the storm. What to do during the storm. Listen, I'd like to tell you that, when fear came over me, I lifted my hands and I prayed a mighty prayer. What prayer did you pray, Robert? What prayer did you pray? Or what mighty scripture did you quote from memory? Or did you bind the devil and did you pronounce healing? What did you do? You're a pastor, you should be ready for this. Well, you'll be disappointed to know that the very few words of prayer I spouted out were, Lord, help. Help. Because like we see here, Jesus was sleeping. The men were going through this great turmoil and it's like Jesus is not there. He's sleeping. It's like he doesn't care. It's like he's not in the area. All right? And when the weight of the emotional turmoil hits you during the storm, sometimes it can feel like God is not there, like God is sleeping, like God doesn't care, like God has his back to you while you're going through this great thing. Just like these men felt like, why is he sleeping? But later on tells them, why were you lacking in faith? You see, the reality is that God's not sleeping. God's not sleeping. But also, when you're in a storm, man, this is the real deal. This is the real deal. So how do we handle this? The only way that we can steer through the storm, that we can survive being in the heart of the storm, is to deal with the issue of fear. How you handle fear determines how far you make it through the storm. Now, the reality with fear is this. Listen, we all get afraid sometimes. Don't listen to these guys who say, I fear nothing. I only fear God and the FBI. No, we don't. No. Fear can come at any time. Moses was afraid to go before Pharaoh. David was afraid when he fought Goliath. Peter was afraid. A man who was with Jesus for 3.5 years. He was terrified when somebody was calling him out, saying, you with him. Fear comes. But the question is not, are you afraid? The question is, what do you do when you are afraid? You see, if you're afraid and you run, you hide, you lash out, you lie, you cheat, you deceive, you sit in the corner and you cover up. Right? If you do that, then you're in trouble. What's the other option? David said this. David said, what time I am afraid. And David is a man who knew fear. He was in wars. He fought Goliath. He had a king chasing after him. He had his own children chasing after him. This was a man who knew fear. He said, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. And that's it. The only way to deal with fear, the only way to steer through the storm is to trust in Jesus. Now, you're probably saying, yep, that's that cliche thing that the religious people always say. The church is always saying, just trust in Jesus. Oh, just trust in Jesus. Just trust in Jesus. What does that even mean? It's like in Antigua, we have our remedy for sicknesses is bush tea. No matter what happens to you, they tell you, drink bush tea. All right? If you have a cold, drink bush tea. If you have a stomachache, drink bush tea. Diarrhea, drink bush tea. You have COVID, drink bush tea. You're dead, drink bush tea. It works. It works. All right? In the same way in the church, you have a problem, trust in Jesus. Trust in Jesus. Or pray about it. God loves you. All right? In His Word. I mean, we use these terms and we float them around, and sometimes it's like, well, what are you guys talking about? But the reality is this, that there's nothing else other than trusting in Jesus. And something we do sometimes is that we tell you what to do instead of telling you how to do it. And tonight, I want to tell you how we can trust in Jesus in the storm, so we can deal with fear, so we can steer through the storm. And it's 3 simple things. Here's the first thing. The first thing you have to do is trust in the person of Jesus Christ. All right? Trust in the person of Jesus Christ. What does that mean? Let me give you an example. If you're walking in town with your mother, she has a heart attack. She goes to the ground. She's holding her chest. As you're on the ground, you're screaming for help. You see a man runs over and he says, hey, I'm a chef. How would you feel? You wouldn't feel relieved. Think, man, I don't need a chef. All of a sudden, you see another lady runs over and she's like, hey, what do you need? I'm a mechanic. He's like, ma'am, how is a mechanic? What? No. But as you're with your mother, all of a sudden, another guy runs over. And this guy, he's dressed in normal clothes, but he comes to you and he says, hey, I'm a paramedic. All of a sudden, you're going to feel a small sense of relief. Why? Because you're not trusting in the fact that there's 3 people standing around you. You're trusting in who this person is. They're a paramedic, therefore they have the knowledge to deal with people who are going through a health crisis. Therefore, you feel a sense of, even though it might be small, of calmness because of who the person is. In the same way, we have to trust in who Jesus is, not just His presence. You see, Jesus was there and they knew He was there. Yeah, we know God is with us through the tough times, but just believing that God is there in the storm is not enough. You have to know who He is so you can trust in that. As I stood there and my daughter is crying her eyes out, she's just 2 days old, 2 days fresh, straight out the oven. 2 days. And they're poking her. Every time she moves, these needles are in her, and she's stuck, and she doesn't know what's happening. As a father, I just want to go and scream to them and tell them, stop, please stop. And they don't know what's wrong with her. They can't figure it out. I'm standing there, and the only thing holding me back is that God stopped me and said, Robert, who's in control? I said, God, you are. Robert, who's guiding the hands of these doctors? God, you are. Who is the one who gives life? You do. Who is the one who takes life? You do. Can this child die on that table unless I allow it? No, he can't. Who loves this child more than you will ever will? God, you do. Then trust me. And with that, I had to stand back with my wife's hand in one hand and my fist clenched over here, because as a father, I can't do anything. As a father, I should be able to defend my child, help my child, protect my child. I couldn't do anything but trust in who he is. I trust him. We'll fast forward a little bit. All right, so I told you that the special unit was 2 hours away. They came with their specialized equipment. They had this big special device that a child goes in, and it has all the bells and whistles, and it's used to keep the child alive and monitor them and whatnot. All right, so they go to get ready to put her in the ambulance. As they get ready to put her in the ambulance, we tell them, okay, let's go. We'll follow right behind you. And the lady's like, no. I was like, no? What do you mean, no? You can't follow us. What do you mean we can't follow you? She says, the policy is that parents aren't allowed to follow the ambulance because in the past, parents have actually run into the back of the ambulance by accident. And if you run into the back of the ambulance, you're going to hurt your child. Therefore, we put a policy in place not to allow it. Therefore, you should not come. And by the way, you're probably going to be, look at her state right now, you're going to be in the hospital for the next 4 or 5 days. So you need to go home, which is 1 hour that way, get clothes, get prepared, and then come to the hospital, which is 2 hours, 2.5 hours that way. So I'm about to put my child with a bunch of people I don't know, in a vehicle I've never seen before, to a city I've never been before, to a hospital I never heard of, while I go in the opposite direction. And God stopped me and said, God had to stop me and say this. God had to stop me and say, Robert, how many fathers does Hadassah have? 2 fathers. Who loves her more? God, you do. Who can be with her in the ambulance as she's going? God, you can. Who's going to be holding her this whole time? God, you will. So trust me. You see, when you trust in the person of Jesus Christ, not only do I trust that he's the life giver, not only do I trust that he's fully in control, but I trust that he's a father and that he loves this child more than I can, and he's going to keep her safe, and nothing can happen to her unless he allows it. So that's the reason why I was able to trust, unlike these disciples who they didn't know who Jesus was. That's the reason why the Bible says they marveled at and they said, what manner of man is this that he can control the winds and the seas? They didn't think he could do it. So therefore, how were they supposed to trust in him to do it when they didn't think so? They should have seen it. I mean, he's healing the blind, the sick, the leper. You should have figured that maybe he has some powers, but they didn't. But I do, because I've read the story and I've read the Bible. I know who my God is. So by trusting in the person, I was able to get through it. That's why what you need to do is get to know who Jesus is. Because by knowing who he is, the person of Christ, that will help you through the storm. An easy thing you could do is just go online and download and search for the names of Christ. And read the verses and learn, because every name that Jesus uses, or every name of God, speaks about who he is as a person. He's our provider. He's our rock. He's our defender. He's the light, he's the way, he's the truth, he's the life, he's a door, he's a shepherd. Right? He's a Prince of Peace, he's the hope. This is who he is. He's the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. Learning these things will help you during the storm because you have confidence in who the person of Jesus Christ is. So the first thing you do is trust in the person of Christ. Second thing you do is trust in the promises. All right? Trust in the promises of Christ. All right? So as I began to calm down, and fear began to subside because I was trusting that God was in control, and we're driving back that way to get our clothes and everything set to go live at this hospital for the next few days. All of a sudden, the fear began to fall upon me because I found out, by foolishly going online and searching it, I found out the cost of these hotels, of this hospital. It's a hospital, it's a new hospital. The ward that I'm going to is on the 7th floor, overlooking the river, in the city, and it's said to be one of the best hospitals in the state of Maine. You know that means money. And as I began to look and see the price and see what's going to cost and on all different examinations, and they tested it with everything, and every single one of these tests is very expensive. As I began to fathom, right, the financial burden that's going to be put on top of me, I began to fear again. I began to feel that financial weight come upon me, and I began to think to myself, man, I'm going to have to quit being I'm going to have to leave the ministry and go get a job that actually pays, and the rest of my life, I'm going to have to be paying back this hospital bill. Just, my whole life is going to be, my purpose is going to be living to pay back this child's bill. All my hopes, all my dreams, it's all done. It's all over. And this weight of financial burden came upon me. I finally got out. I was financially free, getting loads paid, and now I'm back under the pressure again. And if you understand anything about financial pressure, let me warn you, all right, for the young people who aren't there yet, financial difficulties are the toughest. Financial pressure is one of the leading causes of depression and anxiety. Financial pressure is one of the top 3 reasons why people get divorces. Don't get yourself wrapped up in this thing, in financial difficulties and troubles. But the reality is that I couldn't help it. And the fear began to come. And then God had to remind me, Robert, David said this, I was young and now I'm old. I have never seen the righteous forsaken. I've never seen his children begging bread. Robert, I remind you that I said, seek ye first my kingdom. Seek ye first my purposes and my rule and my righteousness, and all these things, food, clothes, your bills, house, all these things will be added unto you. Seek ye first, focus first on doing my will and pleasing me and living a life that pleases me. If you focus on this, I'll take care of the rest. Right? If you do my will, I'll take care of the bill. And God promises that. But we don't want to believe it. Because everybody in the world is struggling with finances. And God had to remind me, Robert, it doesn't matter how much money is nothing to me. Just do what you're supposed to do and I'll take care of it. I was still struggling with it. And this is what God did. We make it to the hospital. A couple of days later, we bump into this couple, a missionary couple. Right? Now, they're there and their daughter is there and she's in the ICU because she was born premature. She was, sorry. She was only 2 pounds. 2 pounds. So I'm talking to them and they told us how much they owe on their finances, and it was like, what? I was like, does a house come with that price? It was a lot of money. Just to give you an idea of how much money, how expensive, medical costs in the US are, just one of the ambulances, now she drove in 3 ambulances, just one of the ambulances cost over 2,000 US. Just one. Now for the Bajans, that's over 4,000 Bajan dollars just for one ambulance. All right, and it didn't even drive that far. All right, for those EC, that's 5,400 EC dollars just to ride in the ambulance. All right, for those from Trinidad, that's over 13,000 DT. $13,000 just for an ambulance. And if you're from Jamaica, well, I'm not even going to call that number. But the reality is this, man, this thing is expensive. So this guy, we're talking to him, and he has this astronomical, 6 figures. And all of a sudden, he goes in his pocket, he takes out 2 $50 bills, and he gives it to us. Now, you're probably wondering, did I take it? Yes, I took it. Of course, thank you. Oh, no, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have. Of course I took it. All right, but no, seriously, we told him, no, sir. You need this more than I do. Your bill is going to be a lot higher than ours is going to be. And he said, listen to me. God's going to give it back to me. We said, okay. All right, we'll take it. We'll take it. He said, trust me, God is going to take care of us. He will give it back to me. The next day we saw him. He said, let me tell you what happened. I went out somewhere. When I went back to my car, I opened the door, and taped to the steering wheel was $100. But not just $100, 2 $50 bills. You heard me, 2 $50 bills. You know what that means? Not only did God give the $100 back to him, but he specifically gave it in 2 $50 bills to remind me and to show us that, listen, Robert, you could trust in me. And this is what happens when you trust in me. Money is nothing to me. And then from that point, I say, God, okay, I'll trust in your promises that your children will never beg for bread, that if I focus on doing your will, you will take care of my needs. And up to this point, the fear left, and it hasn't returned yet. And God is taking care of us. Why? Because I trusted in the promises that he laid down. That's why you need to go in the word and find the promises. God, if you're weak, he promises strength. Right? If you're being attacked and wrongfully accused, he said, I'll be your defender. Listen, if your parents are forsaking you, if your parents are leaving you and abandoning you, he says, if my mother and my father forsake me, the Lord will take me up. The promises are all there. And by resting on them and putting your hands up and saying, okay, God, I trust you, it will help you get through the storm. The storms are coming, so get prepared and let's get through them. The third thing, so first we trust in the person of Christ, who he is. Knowing who he is will give us the faith we need to get through. Then we focus on the promises, understanding his word and what he said is something we can rest and stand on. That's firm. And the third thing, we have to trust in the purpose. You see, there's a purpose for everything. If you look back at the chapter, it says what? It says, and he went, and when he entered in the ship, his disciples followed him. When Jesus entered the ship, the disciples followed. What does that mean? Jesus led them into the ship. Now, it's very important to understand that the rest of the people who were following them, the other multitude of people, Jesus told them to walk around. You could have walked around. You didn't have to go across the water. Jesus could have walked around. Jesus knew, hey, look, a storm's coming. I don't want to put my people through that. Let's just walk around and stay dry. No, he says, let's go on the ship. He led them into that storm because it was for a purpose. If you read from chapter 8, from the beginning, Jesus was healing people. A leper came and said, Lord, if thou will, I can be healed. I can do it. A Roman centurion came and said, Lord, heal my servant. Jesus said, okay, let's go. The centurion said, no. You stand here. If you say the word, they'll be healed. Jesus said, I've never seen a faith like this all in Jerusalem. Jesus was teaching them about faith, but they missed it. So Jesus gave them the ultimate test and the ultimate lesson by taking them on the sea and putting them in a situation where they had to learn. Look what it says in the end. But the men marveled, saying, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? Listen, their whole view of God changed. Their whole view of Christ, of who he was, they marveled, they worshiped, they had reverential fear. From that day forward, as they walked with him, they saw him as in a different light. Why? Because by putting them in the storm, it increased their faith and their view of God changed. And the reason why God has you going through that storm is for a purpose. Because he wants, by the time you come out of the storm, you're a better person, right? You love him more. You can see him more and you can trust him more and you're more the person he wants you to be. You see, I still wear the armband from the hospital to remind me to trust him. Listen, I trust God now more than I ever have. I view him more different. He's more real to me now than he's ever been before. Why? Because he put me through the storm where I had to learn to trust him. You're in this storm for a reason, and he has you in this reason to make you a better person and to receive more of the glory. And when we put our trust in that, we understand I'm here for a reason, and that listen, remember we talked about the person of Christ? One of his names is door. Jesus says, I am the door. All right? Now he says that in John chapter 10 when he was speaking about shepherds and sheep. Now why would Jesus do that? Simple. If you were in the Middle East, and you went into the field and you saw a shepherd building a pen for his sheep, you'd see him using stones and building up a stone wall in a circle right around. And when it comes to the front where the door should be, he would leave it open. He wouldn't put a gate or a door there. And when you go to the shepherd and you say, hey, where's the door? You know what the shepherd would tell you? The shepherd would tell you, I'm the door. Let me say it again. You would look at the pen and realize there's a big gap right there, and you'd say, where is the door? What stops things from going in and sheep from coming out? And the shepherd would say, I am the door. Why? Because the shepherd would lie down in that gap so that nothing or anything that wants to get in the pen has to cross him, and anything that wants to get out of the pen has to pass by him. What does that mean? Jesus was saying, I am the door. Nothing that enters into your life will enter in there unless I allowed it. Which means this situation you're in, the only reason you're experiencing it is because God allowed it. The only reason the enemy is tempting you or trying you is because he allowed it. Because he's sovereign. And when we remind ourselves of this, we understand, no, I'm here for what? A purpose. And we can take joy to know that when I make it through the storm, I'll be a better person. And we can trust him on that. So therefore, when we find ourselves in the storm, we understand these three things. One, to get through the storm, I have to take care of fear. To take care of fear, the Bible says, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In order to trust him, I have to do three things. One, I have to trust in the person of Jesus, who he is. Then I have to trust in his promises, what he said. And then I have to trust in the purpose, the why I'm here. And when we put these things together, it will give us the strength and the confidence to hold on during this storm. Yes, the winds are coming, the water's coming in, but I trust I'll make it to the other side because he led me into it. And if I don't, I'll still be glorified. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 5 days, we were able to leave that hospital. Thankfully, she had too much water on her lungs. They were able to drain it. All right? And now she's doing great. She's doing amazing. But God took me through that storm for a purpose, to teach me this. And then after going through that storm, I receive a message, hey, we would like you to speak on the night about going through storms. I say, hey, there's a purpose. Not only that, but as I speak to you right now, this afternoon, I speak to a guy, counsel a guy in the hospital whose child is in the ICU like mine was. And he's going through the whole world right now. He's going through his own storm right now. And I was able to sit down there with him and speak to him on his level because I was there. Why? Because God had a purpose for my storm, and he has a purpose for your storm. And let's back up a little bit. Yes, we're talking about storms. But this lesson doesn't only apply for storms of life that come and go. This is for our whole lives. See, some of you, your whole life is a storm because you've never given your life to God. And God tells us this, listen, if you've not accepted me as you've not accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, and you're struggling through life, he says these three things. Number one, trust in me and who I am. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who created you. I am the one who can forgive you. Trust in his promises. I promise that whosoever shall call upon my name shall be saved. And trust in his purposes, that I created you that tall, that wide, that color, that whatever. I created you for a purpose, and only through me can your life have fulfillment, because you have a purpose on this earth that nobody else can do. And the day you give me your life is the day that purpose can be fulfilled. And I'm a living testament of that. The day I gave my life to God, everything changed. And he's saying that to you tonight. Yes, we use these principles to get through the storm, but these principles work through all of life. Give your life to God. And remember, the person, the promises, and the purpose. And we hold on to these three things, we can trust him. And when you trust him, life will be a lot better. Trust in him tonight. And I pray that we get through these storms, glorifying God with hands up, worshiping him. Thank you.